Hello, everyone. Happy Tuesday. It is Tuesday, August the 26th, 2025. And we are going to be venturing into and talking about explaining the 10th Amendment today. It should have been the First Amendment, but it ended up to be the 10th Amendment. And so Anna has joined us, and I'm going to bring her onto stage. Hi, Anna. How are
Good
you today?
morning.
Good morning. Good afternoon.
Yeah, well, good morning here in Alaska for sure.
Right, exactly. So today, Anna, we're going to talk about, we've been working up to the 10th Amendment. And I think this is really important for our assemblies to know where they get their real authority in a way, or their recognition should be coming from the United States of America because of our 10th Amendment. Our founding fathers thought that was really important to make sure that the that the other side of the contract never forgot who we were, right? So, and this one is also really important in the fact that they've tried to bury it. They've tried to bury the memory of this and obfuscate it. So I'm going to bring that onto stage here so everybody can see exactly what we're talking about. So the 10th Amendment, the powers not delegated to the United States by the Constitution, nor prohibited by it to the states, are reserved to the states, respectively, or to the people. So, as we talk about this, and I've seen this written a couple of ways, I believe the original way, states, was not capitalized. And so it was all done in lowercase. And when we begin to have to explore the 10th Amendment, we have to remember what the time period in history was when the 10th Amendment was ratified. And so that was the ratification in 1787, 1788. And the founding fathers deliberated over this one until it became the 10th Amendment. And they wanted to make sure that the concentration of federal power was not so great that the people in the states were removed from the decisions of our government.
Right. Well, this requires a knowledgeable reading. Okay. The powers not delegated to the United States. Okay, first of all, powers. Powers are enablement. Okay. Power is the ability to do something. Okay. I think this is something a lot of people miss when they read the constitutions. They think that powers is something apart from services. And actually, the constitutions are service contracts. The powers are what enable them to provide the services. Normally, sovereign states do all their own servicing. Normally, a sovereign country would oversee its own post office, its own patent office. It would take care of its own trademarks and a lot of other things that get delegated under the constitutions to different service vendors. This was a rather radical arrangement that we undertook because we were a fledgling country. We had never had to do this kind of stuff. Nobody here had the power of a patent office, for example, or a postal service. All that had been privately provided to the extent it was provided. And now all of a sudden you have a sovereign government, and the sovereign government has to provide these services, but we're ill-equipped and ill-adapted and have to do it right now. So what they did is they made an agreement with other powers, other governments, and they set up their own fledgling government to do all this stuff that was rather arcane and that they hadn't had to do before, like minting your own money. Okay. So we had three of these I have to take this just a second. I'll be right back.
Okay, that's fine. So, as Anna's talking about, you know, that there was basically, um, the services that were being talked about being provided. For example, we didn't have an adequate Navy fleet for the time period. And again, when you look at these, we have to look at the history of what's going on in the world at the time. And England and France and Spain were all still in the middle of fighting each other. There was uh, press ganging going on in the high seas. We didn't have a real good navy to protect our shorelines. We really didn't have a great, we would really didn't have even an organized uh, army to be able to defend our borders, a navy to defend our water borders. And so this was where, they were starting to look at those service providers to be able to help provide those types of things for us, because they had the resources already in place. Between England and Spain, they had two of the largest navies, or the best navies in the world at that time. And so, and of course, Spain was licking its chops um, from Florida, trying to work its way. So they couldn't really go after the Spanish. So in the contract, that's one of the reasons why they're trying to put these guards around the subcontractors to make sure that they weren't able to usurp our fledgling United States. So, go ahead, Amy.
Right. Well, and so we need to think of powers in terms of enablement. We're a sovereign government enabling these subcontractors to do these things for us. Okay? So we're delegating these certain powers or these certain enablements to the United States. Well, what is the United States? The United States is the American subcontractor that was created under the 1787 Constitution, which is known as the original federal Constitution. And this was called the Constitution for the States of America, the United States of America, I should say. But it was a different United States. It was a separate entity, what we call the Federal Republic. And when you look at the Constitution, the name of the first federal Constitution that was signed in 1787 was the Constitution for the United, small u, States of America, upper lowercase. So, this was a different entity. And the United States that received delegated powers was this first federal subcontractor. Okay, the Constitution, as Lisa points out, had parts that prohibited the United States from doing things, and it had parts that reserved powers to the states, if by omission, if by no other means. So it goes respectively to the states or the people. The retained rights are reserved to the states or the people. Now, notice states has a capital, states is upper lowercase. This means the states operating in international capacity. Or to the people, which has a small p. This means the Union States and their people, the ground zero of all powers and all rights and all interests, were grounded in the people with a small p. So basically it's saying if it's an international issue, it goes to the states. if it's an issue in general, it isn't covered. If it's something that hits down to the national level, it's the people.
And this seems so simple in some ways. However, I've done quite a bit of research, and it's really very obfuscated out there in the description because they want to call the states of that are operating today the sovereign states, and they're not. You
Not at
can't be
all.
sovereign and be contracted.
Right. And you can't be sovereign and be incorporated, which is another important point for people to remember. If something's incorporated, it's part of a different government. Okay, a sovereign government cannot be incorporated because that means that they're chartered by some other government.
Correct. So, I think this is really important, and as I put it, this is where the rub comes in between our jurisdictions and us trying to help them remember and recognize who we are.
Right. And, for example, the Trump administration is making a big point of every other word saying constitutional and constitutionally, and really making an effort, at least in PR, to recall that yes, we do have this contract called the Constitution, and it's a service contract that the federal government is supposed to provide us with these delegated services, and we gave them the powers, the enabling to do this. All right, so we enabled them to, for example, provide us with protection on the high seas and navigable inland waterways. That's an empowerment that we delegated to them. We empowered them to borrow a specific certain version of our flag, the Title IV flag. We defined a special proportion of our flag under Title IV in federal code that is to be used when they're exercising our delegated powers. Okay. And that is the famous war flag that we see all the time with the horizontal stripes. All right. Most people are not aware that when the federal government uses our flag in connection with its delegated powers, that flag is required to be a Title IV flag. It has to be a specific proportion that's spelled out in code that identifies it as the Title IV flag that was given to the federal subcontractors to use when exercising our delegated powers in time of war. We, on the other hand, the states of the Union, use a wider proportion of flag that is our flag, our general purpose flag, and we have two different flags. We have the wartime flag everyone is aware of, and then we have the peacetime flag, which is behind Lisa there. Okay, these are just examples of how there were powers delegated and there were efforts made to enable these guys to function. But we need to keep focused also on the fact that they're service providers. And the reason that they're being enabled and empowered is to provide these services.
Right. I believe they call that an administrative construct, right?
Yeah, absolutely. The constitutions defined how these organizations would be set up and what the powers of each section of the administration would be. We have the executive, legislative, and judicial branches of these service providers stipulated in the contract. So we knew what kind of a construct, as Lisa says, would be providing these services. And then we just enumerate all the services, and we gave them all the powers that they needed to be able to provide them. And this seems like a rather simple thing, but it's something that we never hear. We never hear that. When we're kids in school and they introduce the constitutions, it's just kind of thrown out there at us as a historical document. And we only see one version of the Constitution, which is typically the British territorial version, the Constitution of the United States of America, which at this point should say the Constitution of the United States of America Incorporated.
Right.
But none of this is explained to us. It's just kind of set in front of us at, we're 13 or 14 years old when we see this. And we're expected to read this, and then there's really no discussion. The teacher doesn't stand up there and go through it line by line like we are here, and explain what the words mean, or observe that these are service contracts, or explain that empowerments are actually enablements to provide services. None of that's ever discussed in schools. People don't know this.
Well, I think it's also because the teachers don't know it. It's been hidden from them in their education. It may have been glossed over and kind of, diminished in their training as to what that is, because I've had a chance to talk to some history teachers like, no, the first Constitution, that went away when the second Constitution was put into place. Oh, no, it didn't. It still continued to operate in a capacity in the States.
Well, right. And there are 3 different constitutions. That's a fact that is completely hidden from everybody. Like I say, you typically only see the Constitution of the United States of America. You do not see the Constitution for the small u United States of America. And they kind of gloss over the fact that there's this other constitution called the Constitution of the United States also. So there are 3 different services, or 3 different service contractors, and 3 different constitutions. And another thing that is obscured and never taught to our children is that each one of those constitutions was talking about services and powers that were occurring in a different venue within the law. Now, law, land, air, and water, right? Law is also separated out in those contracts. The original federal Constitution granted the land jurisdiction powers that were delegated to the American federal subcontractor operating under the Constitution for the United Small U States of America. The second Constitution that was adopted in 1789 delegated powers in the sea jurisdiction. The Admiralty and maritime functions were delegated under the Constitution of the United States of America. And the air jurisdiction functions of the federal government that involved delegated powers were delegated under the Constitution for the United States, which went to another subcontractor, which at that time was the Holy Roman Empire. Okay, so you got 3 different constitutions, you got 3 different federal vendors, and within them, each one was dedicated and had delegated powers related to a different venue within the law. So that the Americans were supposed to take care of the land jurisdiction functions. The Brits were supposed to take care of the sea jurisdiction functions, and the Holy Roman Empire contractors were supposed to take care of the air jurisdiction functions. And that's the way the world was organized in 1787. Okay? We are never told this. We are none of this is ever observed. Nobody has ever spoken about this. None of the teachers, none of the pundits, none of the constitutional experts ever take you by the hand and say, okay, well, the Americans were supposed to take care of the delegated land jurisdiction issues, and the Brits were supposed to take care of the delegated sea jurisdiction issues, and the Holy Roman Empire was supposed to take care of the delegated air jurisdiction issues. And nobody talks about jurisdiction.
Right.
Nobody exposes the fact that land is an international jurisdiction, that sea is an international jurisdiction, and that air is both. Air is global in nature.
Ignore the ogre behind the picture.
Somehow this screen even makes him look fat. I don't know how.
That's not the screen, I'll admit it.
Could I?
Hi, Shannon. Bye, Shannon.
I'm still here, kind of. Where'd Jim's vape go?
Okay.
I don't know. I
It
don't.
was just up here yesterday. That's why I was looking.
Oh, I have
I was
no
going to get
idea.
it charged up. And I'm going to steal it for today because I can't find mine.
Oh Lord.
It had help. It's in my room somewhere.
Okay, but what this talks to, Anna, and I want to keep getting back to this point of where we stand. It still talks to the organic state that exists and retains the lawful authority, right?
Right. This tells you in no uncertain terms that the American government, which is excessively downplayed in today's educational system, not only exists, but has states. Who knew?
Gosh, who'd have thunk it?
Right. So here we have a direct reference to our states of the Union and to the people that underlie the whole edifice, the American people. Imagine that. There's in the preamble to the Constitution, and you see this statement, we the people. I don't know of anything that has ever been repeated more often than we the people. And yet nobody seems to understand the fact that the word people is capitalized. It's a capital P on people. And what that implies. If we were just talking about Joe average people, right? If we were talking about you and me and we're all going to get together and have a barbecue, we would be talking a small p on the word people, right?
Right.
Okay. So why is there a capital P on people?
Could be that they're citizens. Could be that they're involved in their government, that they're active, that they're actually governing.
Right. What it means, it's the same reason that there's a capital S on states in the 10th Amendment. Okay, it says states with a capital P in the 10th Amendment. And what it's telling you is that these are people acting in its different capacity.
Right.
You're putting on a different hat. When you're putting on that different hat with a capital P, you're operating as a member of a state government.
Right.
You're operating in international jurisdiction. Okay? This is like raising a flag and saying, okay, I'm putting on my other hat. I'm going from national to international, and I'm now in an international state with a capital S, and I'm functioning as one of the people a lawful person. Okay, so that's what it means. It means that you are a member of your state government and you're operating as a member of your state government. You're not operating as part of your nation state, you're operating as part of an international state. And why is that? Here's something else, as long as we're going to talk about the Constitution and the powers delegated and all that good stuff. When you're thinking about this, you need to be aware that all federal powers, every power delegated by any constitution under the federal constitutional scheme is in what? International jurisdiction.
Right.
They have absolutely no empowerment at the national nation state level. Zero.
Right.
Okay, none. They were never given any powers to do anything that impact our actual union states.
So, and I'm going to stop you right there for a minute because it's really, that's a really good point in fact, and I want to really drive home the point that the word federal doesn't ever. I ask anybody, what does the word federal mean, and they can't tell you. It means contracted.
And we know that because we have copies of the 1824 Webster's Dictionary and dictionaries that go all the way back to the 1750s that tell us that the word federal is a synonym for the word contract. So we're talking about a government under contract. We're talking about a government that has been hired to do specific things and empowered to do certain specific delegated tasks.
Mm-hmm.
So that just kind of blows the whole holy cow, sacred cow business of the Constitution right out of the water and reveals that it is indeed a service contract. Nothing more or less, nothing all that mysterious. We created these different bodies to administer these three separate contracts. And it should not at all surprise us that there are three federal Congresses, right?
Right.
Okay, so we've got three subcontractors, each operating in a different jurisdiction of international law, right? Land,
Right.
air, water. We have three Congresses that are administering these three different contracts, right? And guess what? There should be three presidents, but there aren't. Imagine that. Okay, so start waking up, America. Start thinking these things through. And as you think these things through, be aware that they have implications for the way you live and the way your world works to this very day. To the extent that our constitutions are not being fulfilled and honored, to the extent that the different services vendors have usurped against each other and have made accommodations that were never authorized by us,
Right.
they have created their own world and they are continuing in their errors. And there's only us, the people of this country, operating in their own international jurisdiction, who have the right to correct this mess. Nobody can do it for us. We're the
Right.
only ones with the authority to do anything about it. So
Right.
it's
Exactly.
on us.
It's supposed to end, both ends against the middle. We're in the middle, and we have to be the ones that say stop. We have to be the ones that stand our states up and say, this is what the people want.
And we are the people.
And we are the people. Right.
That's the other problem that we were discussing this week, is that we've been misidentified, not as the people, but as British territorial US citizens, as if we were born in Puerto Rico. Now, this is a political status we can adopt if we want to. We can also adopt the status of a municipal citizen of the United States and go to work for the Federal Civil Service if we wish. All right? We can adopt these, but did we? No, we did not. We did not knowingly, willingly, voluntarily, and with full disclosure ever adopt either one of those separate foreign political statuses. Even if we signed up knowingly enough and, signed up for a federal civil service job, the changes in our political status and the different obligations that we would then inherit were never explained, were never disclosed. For example, if you go and get a job at the post office, nobody ever tells you, okay, well, you're giving up all of your constitutional guarantees and you're now liable to pay federal income taxes and blah, 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 blah. None of that's ever disclosed. Okay. And so the people who sign up to work for federal services like the post office or different agency positions and whatnot, they're never given full disclosure about the impact on their political status and their rights and everything else. And neither are the members of the military. They're never told that, okay, well, you're entering into a private mercenary force and you may be asked to do illegal and immoral things, and you may be forced to go into other countries and commandeer natural resources. No, none of that is ever told to the people who sign up to serve in the military, or what appears to be a military. It's actually a giant mercenary force.
Mhm.
That fact is never told. And so all of these contracts are being exercised under conditions of deceit and non-disclosure. It's a sin by omission. It's not what they tell you that's false. It's what they don't tell you that makes it all false.
That's right. That's right. So, Anna, one of the things that we hear even in our own state governments is they provide pushback from the states of, right? Is, well, those that went away when the federal republic went away.
Now, when the Federal Republic went away, two other contractors were left. Two foreign federal subcontractors were still functioning as normal. Okay. The first one of those foreign federal subcontractors was a British territorial company called the United States of America that was the subject of the Treaty of Paris, 1783. Now, Americans need to understand that the constitutions are the implementation of treaties that took place that ended the War of Independence. And there are treaty series. The Treaty of Versailles is what affects the land jurisdiction. The Treaty of Paris is what affects the sea jurisdiction. And the treaties of Ghent and Westminster and others are what affect the air jurisdiction. Okay? So the direct effect of each of these constitutions are the implementations of treaty agreements. All right? So you start out with the treaties. What did the treaties agree to? And then you ask yourself, well, is this a land treaty, a sea treaty, or an air treaty? Okay. And then you know for a fact what was included under each federal constitution.
Right.
Which constitution is the implementation of the land treaty. Okay, all of the Treaty of Versailles, everything in series that had to do with land jurisdiction was under a Treaty of Versailles. Therefore, we know for a fact that this Treaty of Versailles makes this agreement, which is then implemented by the Constitution for the United, small u, States of America. Oh, and this sea treaty in the Treaty of Paris series guaranteed this, and this is implemented by the Constitution of the United States of America. There is a direct correlation. Here's the treaty, here's the Constitution implementing it, here's the federal subcontractor who is supposed to provide these services. Boom, boom, boom. It is just as simple and clear as the dawn light of day, and nothing so mysterious or unusual, because remember, at the same time, all the other countries were functioning under the same system. The French had their land treaties, they had their sea treaties, they had their air treaties. The Germans, same thing. Everybody was, following the treaty series. They were doing the implementations in their own governments. This was not unusual. This is the way it was done. And it was extremely logical and simple. But we are never taught any of this. We are not taught that the constitutions are the implementation of the treaty agreements that were made ending the War of Independence.
In 2020, Anna, my husband came across this woman who was doing this podcast, and he was like, "You need to listen to this. I think this is what we're looking for. This is the answer." And it was you.
Oh no!
And I started listening to the podcast, and I said, "Pause that. Pause that." And he goes, "Well, why?" And I said, because I said, "I want to go look up the treaty." And I went and looked up the treaty, and I looked at him and went, "Oh my gosh, this is real.
She's right.
This is it. This is real." And I went and looked up the Treaty of Versailles, and I recognized right off the bat that this is what we needed to do. This was where the stance is. So anybody that's a doubt, I always tell them, don't believe me. Go look it up yourself, because that's what I did. Is I went and looked at the treaties, and then I compared them against the constitutions, and I knew that was where we wanted to be. So yes, very much so to that point. So the state of is really trying to obfuscate, though, that knowledge, that acceptance and recognition that they're not the only game in town.
Well, and this is knowledge about the constitutions that is never taught anywhere. And yet you can directly observe it if you want to. If you are really curious as to where did the constitutions come from, why are there 3 of them? What are they? Why are they set up this way? I mean, why was this power delegated and that power wasn't delegated? It's all to do with these treaty series that ended the War of Independence. It's the Treaty of Versailles for the land, it's the Treaty of Paris for the sea, and it's the treaties of Westminster and Ghent for the air.
Yes, exactly. So as we look at this, I would hope, one of the questions I get from people as they're just beginning to discover us, or I'm trying, we're going into discussions and they're looking at me like I need to get out my tinfoil hat that I have, that, they go, "Well, where do you get your authority to do this? The state of Ohio is the authority, right?" And my answer is, have you ever read the 10th Amendment? Because the 10th Amendment points us back to who's in charge, right?
And it isn't the British territorial government. No, it's us, the people, and our states. So there's one of my favorite organizations in the Patriot movement is the 10th Amendment Center.
Mhm.
We're not the only ones who picked up on exactly what the 10th Amendment preserves. And this gives us the recognized lawful and legal right, above and beyond all else, to do anything, literally anything, that is not specifically delegated or prohibited by those service contracts.
Right. I have a really great clip, and for anybody that is really interested in it, it's about 24 minutes, but it is a dive into the 10th Amendment by the 10th Amendment Center that should dispel all doubt about why we're doing what we're doing and who's in charge, right? It's us, the people, with the lowercase p and the capital P, working together to get our states stood back up to stand against the contracted states of.
Exactly. We're supposed to be telling them what we want done. And it's our fault if we don't tell them. Okay, now we've had this recently, this past week, we've had quite a discussion about the Reconstruction. Okay, let's observe. We're supposed to have 3 federal subcontractors, and those subcontractors are supposed to be implementing treaty provisions that were worked out at the end of the War of Independence. Okay? What happened when suddenly one of those federal subcontractors was not able to perform their job? Okay, that's what happened in 1861. One of the federal contractors, and it happened to be the American contractor responsible for land jurisdiction functions, that was undermined. And so, as a result, the 2 other federal subcontractors, the one that was responsible for jurisdiction of the sea functions and the one that was responsible for jurisdiction of the air functions, instead of coming forward and saying, hey, American people, this is all messed up. The delegated powers that you intended this organization to provide are not being provided because that business went out of business. You know, it's not functioning, it's not performing. This is an emergency situation. The delegated powers in the land jurisdiction are not being performed because this contractor went out of business. Okay? This would be like you had 3 contractors. You had one contractor to mow your lawn. You had one contractor to remove the garbage from your bins every week. And you had one contractor to do your housekeeping. Well, suddenly, the one that's supposed to mow your lawn isn't mowing your lawn anymore. So instead of the other 2 contractors saying, hey, your lawn's not getting mowed, you got to do something about this, they went, Mom, and they came in and did the work of the missing federal subcontractor.
Mhm.
And of course, they had no authority to do so. You didn't hire them to mow your lawn. You hired them to take out the garbage and do the housekeeping. Okay, but they began doing the job of the missing federal subcontractor without any authorization or permission or knowledge on your part. And they start billing their expenses for doing that work to you. They have glommed on to somebody else's contract as assumed successors to contract. And I'm sorry, an assumption of such broad sweeping powers as were delegated to the American subcontractor is not a permissible thing. This was an act of usurpation against us and against our subcontractor as well.
Right.
Now,
That's
it's true that the Federal Republic stopped functioning, but if it stopped functioning, what happens? Just use the example I gave you. The guy that was supposed to mow your lawn broke his leg and can't do it. The guy that you hired to remove your garbage and the guy that you arranged with to do your housekeeping got together and decided to do the lawn too. All right? But what should have happened? What should have happened is they should have told you that, hey, look, he's not mowing your lawn. You need to do something about this. And in the interim, what naturally happens? Okay, ask yourself, I hired this company to mow my lawn, trim my hedges, but now all of a sudden the owner broke his leg, he got divorced, his truck got impounded, whatever. He can't do the job right now. So what happens in reality, in our world, right, is that, oh, I have to mow my lawn or I have to hire someone else to do it.
That's right.
That's what should have happened in 1861. There should have been this immediate recapitulation in which Abraham Lincoln announced to the entire world and to our people that, okay, the federal subcontractor who's supposed to do all of these functions is no longer able to provide those services. So there has to be a new arrangement made by which the delegators choose a new contractor, or the delegators take over and provide those services themselves. It was never delegated to the British territorial contractor. It was never delegated to the Holy Roman Empire contractor. Therefore, what happens? You have to either mow the lawn yourself or you have to hire someone new. That's what should have happened in 1861. That is what Abraham Lincoln was morally, legally, lawfully required to announce to the American people and to stand back and let them deal with. And instead, he usurped against us. And it's right in the record showing that he did. Lincoln was no hero. He was a rat. And he was a loyal British territorial officer. He moved in on his employers and usurped against us and against our government. And there is no two ways about it. I wish it wasn't true, but Honest Abe was an ironic nickname.
It was.
He was the most dishonest, most crooked president we ever had.
Lawyer.
And he was a
Attorney.
bar association lawyer.
Yes.
Now, the only way that he could be president of anything was to be president of a private corporation, because by 1819, our forefathers had already passed and ratified the Titles of Nobility Amendment, which prohibited bar attorneys from holding any public office in our government.
Why do you think that was, Anna? Because they thought they were all rats?
Right.
They knew they were rats.
And Lincoln was approved as a member of the Illinois Bar Association in 1834. So almost 30 years prior to 1861, 27 years, Lincoln became a bar attorney and adopted British territorial citizenship as a result. in order to be a bar attorney, he had to adopt that citizenship status. Okay, so he was operating in a foreign British territorial citizenship status. He was a Tory. He was a proven bar attorney, and he was prohibited from holding any office in our government. Okay, he could not be the Federation president. He could not serve as the president of the United States, meaning the American federal subcontractor. He had no ability to do any of that. He could only serve as part of the British territorial subcontractors giddy up. And that's what he did. And he served against the American employers when he had the opportunity.
Right. So Anna, with the 10th Amendment though, and knowing the whole history and understanding our three federal contractors, when the Civil War happened, the Reconstruction wasn't just about reconstructing roads and federal facilities. It was supposed to be about reconstructing our federal republic.
It was supposed to be reconstructing the government that had been thrown into disarray and chaos, and that had been limping along in a kind of veiled trusteeship position from 1861 until the end of the war. And then you have this flurry of activity called the Reconstruction Acts. And if you ever spent any amount of time whatsoever reading the Reconstruction Acts, which are still on the books and still viable, okay, very little has been changed about the Reconstruction Acts. Now, bear in mind, the Reconstruction Acts were written from the British territorial perspective, and they basically are addressing only those things that the British territorials considered important, not necessarily what we consider important, but what they considered important. Nonetheless, if you read the Reconstruction Acts, it is blatantly obvious, okay, that this is about reconstructing part of our government. And despite differences in names and whatnot, it becomes apparent that this was never done.
Right.
The British went ahead and did their reconstruction. The Holy Roman Empire went ahead and did their reconstruction to the extent that they had to do a reconstruction. But the Americans never did a reconstruction because we didn't know anything had happened. We weren't told that we needed to do a reconstruction.
Right.
Okay.
And communication was very difficult back then, and especially post civil conflict.
Right.
That there was so much disarray that it was the communication, if it had been bad before, it was worse then. And there was not the ability to get, for example, circuit riders out to put that knowledge out to the American people. And even if they had tried, the Tories on either side of what was going on would have tried to stop it as insurrectionists at that time, because they had put out the Lieber Code basically, and they had made it almost military assumptions about people, which is really where our Ex parte Milligan comes in. And studying the Ex parte Milligan case, they were really trying to make the people the enemy as well in all of that.
Right. Well, their standpoint trying to justify all this was they didn't know who was an enemy and who wasn't, because we were undeclared in the war. The actual states never participated in the Civil War. So, what did individual people side with? If you didn't declare your political status, if you didn't make it clear, then they had an excuse to consider you a rebel and prosecute and persecute you. But of course, they never told the people that they needed to declare their position on any of this. And so it just left them with a big, pile of fish in a barrel that they could shoot at will.
Right.
And this whole thing was prosecuted illegally and immorally and unlawfully. For example, there was no declaration of war from any Congress. We have a total of 6 Congresses, and not one of them ever declared war in this American Civil War. It was not a war. It was a mercenary conflict. None of this was ever described to the American people. Now, Abraham Lincoln could have, in theory, stood up and said, okay, well, things are all messed up here. Federation of States, we need decisions from you as our employers as to how this is supposed to be resolved. And at that time, the Federation could have come into session and the states could have taken a vote and said, okay, well, we're setting up a new federal subcontractor. Here it is. Or they could have decided, all right, well, for the time being, the Federation will take charge of the functions of the missing federal subcontractor, and we'll do the work and direct the operations. That's what should have happened. But Abraham Lincoln prohibited and precluded that from happening by his silence, by not coming forward and telling the truth. Now, it's true that it was hard for us to communicate in the 1860s. We had a fledgling telegraph system, a fledgling ability to go by Pony Express across the Great Plains all the way to California. We had limited service to the West Coast by going around the Horn, right?
Yes.
Of South America. So we did have limited communications. However, we did also have the ability to get out to the people via newspaper. We did have a well-established railroad system in the eastern United States. And so, Mr. Lincoln could have stood up and said, well, this is the situation we've got here. We need decisions from the Federation of States regarding the American federal subcontractor, the Federal Republic, in order to continue doing land jurisdiction delegated functions.
Right. Could have, but didn't. And everyone after that has helped hide that obligation that they have to us through these Bill of Rights. And even today, they really don't want to talk about the 10th Amendment or the 9th that we studied last week.
No, and they don't want to talk about their non-performance and failure to advise and failure to report the situation that arose in 1861 to the proper authorities.
Right.
That was treason, by the way, because when there's something of that kind and magnitude, you have an obligation to report to specific officers. And Lincoln didn't.
Right. And I think, Anna, that there's been a couple of times with people who, when they ask me about, I have to go to court, or I've got so and so in jail and blah blah blah. I said, stand on those 9th Amendments, and they go, what? Or I said, or they're writing a notice to their state and mention the 10th Amendment, because that's who they are supposed to be serving, right? They're supposed to be listening to us.
Right. And if it's not in the Constitution, guess what? Like issues of health, there isn't a single mention of the word health in the constitutions, any of them.
Right.
Okay, so that is obviously a power not delegated to the United States, not prohibited to the states. It isn't even mentioned. Okay.
Mhm.
And so it's reserved to the states respectively or to the people.
Right.
Okay, so when all these issues of public health and COVID-19 and all this other stuff came up, obviously it was not mentioned in the constitutions. There was no power granted to any federal subcontractor related to health. They had no ability to issue mandates and do all of this nonsense, with what exception? They could order their own personnel around. They could tell their own employees what to do.
Right.
They had no power approaching the general public. And yet they usurped again and rolled out this entire monstrosity of the pandemic and tried to apply that to everyone. And they were coercive. They put everyone under horrible duress for a period of years. And they got away with it to an extent because they were operating in a private capacity, not a public capacity, because they have no public authority related to health.
No. Yeah. Exactly. So Anna, this is this is really the kind of the basis and the foundation in many ways of where we can enforce our authority and our standing. Not that we couldn't do that before, but this is a reminder to them. Remember, we talked about that we're doing these amendments because we're finding where the fences are, right? And
Right.
we're going to be able to remind them in our notices and in our communications with them what their obligations are to us. And that's what this is really about.
Right. So, in the case of the United States, the Federal Republic, that is, no longer exists. It doesn't exist because the offices and infrastructure supporting it collapsed. Okay. So the Confederation of States that originally existed vanished. And it was replaced by a British territorial look-alike, sound-alike system, a confederation of British territorial states that moved in illegally, immorally, after the fighting and the mercenary conflict stopped. They came in and they said to all the state assemblies that were then still functioning that you have to write a new state constitution. You have to write a new state of Wisconsin constitution. You have to write a new state of New York constitution. Well, why was it that the states suddenly had to write these new state constitution? It was because new contractors were coming on board and they needed a new contract in order to function. So they bounced out the original American state organizations that had been running everything, and they surreptitiously introduced these British territorial interlopers. They substituted British territorial organizations for American organizations. And this is very clear in what went on in the aftermath of the quote unquote Civil War. And so we've had foreign organizations in here operating as state organizations, performing the routine functions of government in all the states of the Union ever since the end of the Civil War. And I compare this to a cuckoo bird. They came in and they they substituted their state of state for our state of state. Now, what happened to our state of state? Well, all of the assets and everything that belonged to our state of state, our American state of state organization, was rolled up and cashiered in a state trust. And this is where you get such grammatical incongruities as the Wisconsin State Capitol and the California State University. There's a missing word there. It should say Wisconsin State Trust Capital. It should say California State Trust University. They just conveniently left that little word out so that we wouldn't understand that our states of state organizations have been cashiered under this British territorial usurpation for 150 years. So every time you see state of state, it's not your state of state, it's their state of state, which surreptitiously came in and usurped against your lawful government.
Right. I go back to the example of is it the actual state with the land and the soil, or is it just the picture of the state and the land and the soil?
Is it the cat or a photo of the cat or a painting of the cat? Or
that's it.
You know.
So yeah, or a painting of the rat, right?
Hey, I've got the greatest cat here. You should see him. He's grown into an animal. He is just, a whole lot of kitty going on.
Oh,
and
wow.
So I have a real cat, and I have photos of the cat, and I have videos of the cat. But let me tell you, those British territorial states of states need to go. We need to be in charge of our own government, providing our own services, and all this British interference needs to be recognized for what it is and bounced right out the door.
So, Anna, that's going to take us focusing, though, on getting our state up. And that means all 4 assemblies of our state operating. Okay.
Right.
We need to be focused on that. I realize, and we've had this discussion before, I realize that there's a lot of people who want to sound their counties up. They think that that's going to be the way to go. But until they get their state up, that's where our focus really needs to lie.
Right. It's fine to start operating and, start getting your county set up too. There's nothing wrong with that. It's just that it cannot be the function, it cannot be the focus until we get the state operating properly. Exactly. And the reason for that, there are a lot of reasons for that, but one of the reasons is that we were defrauded in a specific step-by-step fashion. And in order to unravel the fraud, we have to go back through those steps. As a thing is bound, so it is unbound. That is a primary fundamental maximum of law, I should say maxim of law. So we were defrauded and mischaracterized and misrepresented. And in this process of this fraudulent impersonation scheme, certain steps were taken. In order to unravel that, we have to retrace our steps and get back to where we were at the time that all of this began. And we've done all of our homework, and we have done this process to unravel the fraud from the get-go. Now, some people think that they can just scream, fraud, fraud, and that it's all just wiped away as if it never happened. But there was fraud on different levels. there was, it wasn't just one fraud. It was fraud across a whole range of issues and identities. There were states of states impersonating our states of states. There were territorial states impersonating our states. There were British territorial persons impersonating us. There were municipal persons impersonating us. All this has to be unraveled. It has to start where it is, and then it has to be unraveled back to where it should be. So, one of the big questions and arguments that we have is with the so-called national assemblies. Well, that's completely not part of our customary government. Our states are nations. We are nation states, okay? And so when we talk about national, we're talking about state. When the British territorials talk about national, they're talking about the whole country. Okay? So these are two separate concepts of nation and two separate concepts of state. And so, once again, the Brits are trying to impersonate us and trying to usurp against us and trying to substitute their state, their territorial state, for the actual physical state and the actual physical people. They're trying to use this as a ruse, a cuckoo bird substitution scheme by which they would substitute their personnel, their British territorial citizenry, okay, for the American people. And it's important that we draw a line and that we stand up as American people, because only the Americans are in a position to be able to restore the Federal Republic or to do the work of the Federal Republic in its absence. Okay, this is the part of our government that is absent, but it doesn't have to be absent in terms of its functions. And we, the Federation of States, can pick up where it left off seamlessly, and we, as the delegators of those powers, can speak to those issues. Okay? If we delegate our ability to go to an apple orchard and pick the apples off the tree to someone else, does this mean that we have no ability to do the same thing ourselves?
Not at all. Of course.
No. It was our right to begin with to go pick those apples, and we don't need anybody else to do it for us. We may want someone else to do it for us, but we can certainly go do it. Okay.
Right. And that's where, I think a lot of the states are faced with not enough capital P people wanting to do the work and get involved and actually work towards setting up their state. And this is where it's so incredibly important for us to recognize that this is where we need to be first, and that we need to be dedicating our time and our energies towards this, keeping an eye on our counties, getting to know the people on our counties, beginning to work towards the day when we can have enough people to organize our counties. But at the same time, the important work that we need to do and where we get some of this restored is at the state level.
Exactly. It's when it comes to international things and federal things, the only power that matters is the state.
Right.
And the Union state, as I have explained ad nauseum, is built of the counties. And that's important to our sovereignty, and that's important to how we live our lives in each of the states of the Union. But it is not important internationally. because the counties were precluded from having international powers. So the counties by themselves do not have that kind of ability, generally speaking, to represent the state or the country.
That's right. That's right. So yes, somebody just commented geographically defined. Of course it is. You know,
Right.
it's jurisdictionally defined, and jurisdiction has everything to do with it. So I can't. We can't emphasize more in terms of the importance and how this all ties together here, and allows us to operate our states and begin to gain back the authority that we should have on our states through our state assemblies.
Right. The state assemblies are supposed to be telling the state legislature what the priorities are and where to spend the money and how much.
Right. Yeah. Today I was just reading where on my own national jurisdiction, my winter home, they were saying that, oh, be prepared that you're going to get another 13% property assessment increase. We just had a 37% property assessment increase.
So they're gunning for a 50% increase in property taxes in just a year.
Yes.
And there's nothing to stop them from introducing 100% property tax increase next year and a 200% property tax increase the next year. And the key for you, America, is to understand that you don't owe a property tax. You are exempt.
Right. Right. And so, but this is also important that everybody goes, what can we do about it? Well, what we can do about it is we can get our state assemblies up to the point where we can go to the legislature and say, no, you're not going to do that. In fact, no, you're not doing any of that. Right.
Right.
And it's, and this is where, we really need to focus. People, focus, get your state up. So it's really important. And I always talk, when I talk to the states, and I encouraging them getting their assemblies all into place, their 4 assemblies, getting their state government. Ohio doesn't want to be the only daisy standing in the field.
Right. Absolutely. And that's where I was when all this began. I didn't want to be the last American.
Right. Exactly.
With that happy note, I have to leave.
Okay. All right. Well, thank you, Anna, so much for today. I think this was really great. I think people learned an awful lot from it and clarified it. Stand on that 10th Amendment, assemblies, and stand on your 9th Amendment. Stand at the 9th Amendment and hold the line, right? Make them do their due diligence. So,
yes.
All right. All right. Well, everyone, have a wonderful Tuesday. We will see you next week. Going to be a busy week next week, Anna. Got a lot going on. So that's our family reunion week.
I'm sending you a package. Look for it despite all.
Okay. All right. All right, everyone. Thank you so much. We will see you next Tuesday at 2:30. Have a great day.